Welcome everybody to the 8th session of the Contact Center Network this year. So can you believe it? We are in August. We're pretty much in September. So the year is flying by, and it will be Christmas before you know it. Because I love Christmas. But we've got a great session lined up today. We've got, like I said just a second ago, we've got Babs Crane, who's joining us from company Designed. And we've got Paul Banks, who's joined us from the analytics company. And we've got a third guest who I don't know who it is, but if you could put yourself on mute, that'd be awesome. But yeah, today we're talking about contact centers and behavioral science. So I am going to share my screen, and Rochelle's in a co-working space. So no worries, Rochelle. Thank you for letting us know. Right, so let's go through today's presentation and do some introductions. I won't spoil the slides that we've got for the guys, but we've got a backup there just in case we need it. Planning and preparation, all that kind of stuff. So question for everybody on today's session: are you using behavioral science in your contact center? And if you are, how you use it? What are you using it for? So in the chat, in the chat box, drop in a hashtag science and just let us know what you're using it for. If you're using it, great. If you're not, don't worry. We're not going to try and flog you anything. But if you are using it, what are you using behavioral science in the contact center for? Because I think there's a whole raft of things that we can be using it for. And both Paul and Babs are going to give us an insight into how it can be used. And actually what it is, because it can be like a baffling science, can't it? One of those things where they're like, what actually is behavioral science? So Babs is going to give us an introduction into that. But if I ask you just to drop into the chat anything that you use it for, and if you're familiar with it, how are you using it? Just so we can understand a little bit more about everybody's view on this call. And if you're not chatting, would you mind just putting yourself on mute? That would be awesome. So introductions and agenda for today. So we're going to be doing networking now. So opportunity for everybody to drop in your LinkedIn links into the chat, introduce who you are, what your experiences are, and opportunities to get to know people sociably. It's the one and only time where you can really flog your stuff. So if there is a link to something that you'd like somebody to be aware of, then drop it in there. But please don't use this session as a means to flog all your stuff and harass people in the chat. That's just not on. That's not what networking is about. We're going to do an introduction into behavioral science, and we're going to talk with the TMAC guys about how they've used both data and behavioral science to inform some of the work that they've done and some of the positive case studies that they've seen as a result of doing that. So we can actually see real time what behavioral science can do when we apply it into the contact center. And then Babs is going to kind of bust some myths and tell us exactly what it is and how we can start to fuse some of it all together to look at behavioral science and behavioral design. And iPhone Adele, if you could put yourself on mute, that would be awesome. And then there are 3 other dates that we've got that are coming onto the platform as well for September, October, and November. So I'll tell you all about those as well. But just to kind of give you a little bit of background on some of the stuff that we talk about from these sessions and what we do with the Contact Center Network is we try and focus primarily in the realm of customer experience in contact centers. And we look at all the 4 kind of key quadrants around people, process, leadership, and technology. And I think this kind of topic for today almost sits in the techie space, in the people-y space, and also you can apply it to the leadership space. So you've got a raft of things that it can be applied to. And when we think about how behavioral design works, there's probably 5 hot topics that I think we want to try and cover today. And if you didn't appreciate that whizzy graphic then please do let me know. But we're going to try and look at some of these areas. So the hot topics in behavioral science for me, and some of the stuff that we've talked about, is how home working is affecting the relationships that we see in the contact center and how we can bridge some of that social gap. How we can look at behavioral science and technology and how that impacts the technology experience by thinking about things like chatbots and the receptivity to people in chatbots, and how actually, how can we create more advocacy for them by looking at some of the behavioral patterns. Then we've also got leadership engagement, and how that impacts overall kind of interactions when we're looking at things like change management. And then how can we look at how we can use data and behavioral science, fuse those together to deliver some really great customer experiences. And then ultimately, we are all humans. So how we talk, how we interact, how we communicate is really important. So how language, text, and speech is impacting the consumer experience. So that's all some of the things that we're going to try and get to today. We don't have a full 3 hours, so might not cover them all. But we'll certainly get some inroads into some. So without further ado, I'm going to welcome my guests, Babs Crane and Paul Banks, and I'm going to hand over an intro into Paul first, and then we'll come on to Babs, and then we'll get into the meat of today's session. So Paul, over to you. Take yourself off mute, Paul. I can't believe I had to tell you. There we go. 18 months in.
I'm not great with technology, Gary. Thanks for having me on, Gary. Hi, everyone who I haven't met before. I think I've met a few of you, but some new faces on there. So great to meet you all. So I'm Paul Banks, and I'm part of the solutions team here at the Modular Analytics Company, or TMAC, as everybody calls us, because especially on a Friday afternoon when you've had a couple of beers, that's quite a mouthful to pronounce. Our background is all from the contact center industry. So the senior leader team came together around common frustrations with the industry, and we set out to be a bit of a differentiator and a disruptor in that industry. We come together around the common challenges at one end of the scope. So the problems that are facing contact centers, we use data science to solve those problems. However, as part of that approach, we intrinsically know that contact centers are essentially a people business. It's not about technology. It's not about data science. It's not about, it's not even essentially about the customers themselves most of the time. It's about engaging your employees, getting your employees to feel empowered and motivated, and as a result, provide a great experience for your customers, and as a result, so impacting on your KPIs for the business. So with the best will in the world, you can have some great technology. So you can have enterprise grade technology, you can have fantastic innovations, but ultimately, if people don't want to use them, or they don't add the value that they're supposed to add at the bottom end of the chain, then people won't use them and they'll be absolutely worthless. So to combat that and to try and address that from a customer perspective, we brought in behavioral science and behavioral design into our tools. So I'll let Babs and pontificate on the differences between them, because behavioral design is not the same as behavioral science. But we use both within our platforms to help you make decisions faster, better, and quicker. The outcome of that is that behavioral science can really help with some shortcuts on how to be more efficient, on how to get the outcomes that you want to get both for your customers and for the business. But also in terms of behavioral design, it can really sort of drastically improve the uptake of new technology and solutions. So we're a big fan of it, and I'll show you some clips shortly as to where we are with it. Gary's probably a good point to share the screen and show you a little bit about where we are. So this is us. We're in the contact center market space. We don't really we have other ventures out the side, but contact centers is where we are. Our three main goals are to get customer value, improve customer value. So how do you get the most value out of every interaction? How do you understand what every customer says and feels and improve their customer experience? And how do you manage to get every agent to be a top performer? And if you can achieve those three things, then I think it's safe to say that you're heading for a good amount of success. I will stop sharing right there, and I will hand over to Babs for a bit of an intro to herself.
Thank you very much. It's lovely to be here and meeting lots of new faces. It's only Gary and Paul that I think I've met before, so it's nice to see everybody and nice to be invited along. So as Paul mentioned, I've been working alongside TMAC for the past year, using behavioural science and applying behavioural science to the design of a lot of their products that they are now offering out to market. My background is, my feet are kind of in two camps. So I'm a behavioural scientist, but I'm also a designer. So for the last 9 years, I've been working as a designer, or nearly 9 years, graphic design, web design, long before the days that UX, user experience design, was kind of categorized as its own thing. So that's been my career for the last 9 years. And prior to that, I was working within sales, not specifically in a call center as such or in a contact center, but it was internal account management. So it was a very heavily phone-based role. And it was actually in that role back 14, 15 years ago when I first encountered psychology and psychological theory in the world of work, in the business world, which I found absolutely fascinating. My path, I suppose, has been, I'd say, somewhat unconventional, which probably makes it sound a little bit cooler than it actually is. But I actually encountered a lot of these behavioural science principles at quite an early age without realising it. Now I understand what they were, but I was definitely at the point when most people were going off to university when I experienced such a thing as choice overload and choice paralysis, where I had too many options open to me, that in fear of making the wrong decision, I actually ended up making a decision not to go to university at that point, living in the faith that I'm sure I'd find something in the world of work. And actually, I was expecting it to happen far later in my life, but thankfully it happens earlier on. And I discovered psychology being used out there, primarily within recruitment, personality profiling, psychometric testing, and things like that. And I was absolutely fascinated with it because it informed a lot of sales training back then, presentation training. So it was these theories of it being woven through the company. And I just wanted to learn more about them. And I was reading a lot of literature anyway, and trying out little techniques from things that I was reading. And I thought, I'm going to go off and I'm going to do a degree in this. And then I framed that in a way, and again, this is an example of how the way we frame things actually really matters, and it's how we can motivate ourselves through things. I framed all of my studying as a hobby, and I set myself the tiniest targets, incremental goals the whole way through, and somehow 5 years later I had a degree in psychology. And because I was working the whole way through my degree studies, it was actually really quite interesting and beneficial because I could start to apply a lot of this stuff, by which point I was working as a designer. So once I started learning about cognitive psychology, which is the underpinning of what makes us pay attention to certain things, how do we remember certain things, why do we acquire language, and what's the importance of that and the impact of that on the way we think. So all of these things I was learning about, and I was in a position where I was able to start applying them to artwork and to design and to websites and whatever it was that I was being commissioned to do at the time. So I got to the end of my degree, and I was already applying it. So I wanted to specialise in an area, and the area that I specialised in is consumer psychology. So I went off and did a master's degree, again whilst working. It definitely isn't the easy route, but I did
punishment, Babs. You are a glutton for punishment.
Really was. They tried to get me to do a PhD, but that is definitely where I drew the line. Like, no more. Cognitive overload, another concept that's really important. So yes, I glutton for punishment. I decided to go off and specialise, and I specialised in consumer psychology because I really wanted to find an area that enabled me to apply psychology and all these psychological theories, but in obviously an area that I'm fairly familiar with. Applying it in the business world to me felt like a relatively underexplored area, because the first thing people tend to think when they think of psychology is the therapeutic applications of it, which of course have dominated, and rightly so. And I mean, it's a wonderful vocation, and clinical psychologists and counselling psychologists, and there's lots of other different applied areas do fantastic work. But because my background's always been within the world of business and obviously sales and marketing and design and communications, basically, that's why I went into consumer psychology, which is where a lot of behavioural science sits. So behavioural science has been coming to fruition all the way through, like it's been working in parallel with me through my studies as well. So as I've been studying, this has also become quite popular in the world of business. So it's all kind of works quite nicely in parallel. So nowadays, like I say, my feet are kind of in two camps. When people hear about psychology, behavioural science, and design and communications, it doesn't seem initially like a really obvious fit of two worlds meeting, but actually, and hopefully at the end of this, we all appreciate we are all human beings, and if something like B2B sales and B2C sales and the way they're all categorized, historically quite differently, but at the end of the day, we are all humans and we all follow quite similar patterns of behavior. There are always individual differences, and we always, that people, we can't predict absolutely everything, but there are certain things that help us to predict behavior a bit better and then design for it and improve experiences with that knowledge.
So, Babs, I think there's probably a really great opportunity to delve into some of the slides that I know you've prepared to kind of understand a little bit more about what human-centered design is, what behavioural design is, and how we can relate it to some of the things that happen perhaps in the contact centre. Now, I know that you're not a contact centre specialist like the vast majority of people on here, but you are a behavioural specialist. And I think it'd be interesting to understand from your perspective and the behaviours that you see in the consumer world, how we can talk about some of those in the contact centre that might inform some of the things around customer experience. So I'm going to let you decide which of your slides that you want to eke out and kind of use that to illustrate the point. And if anybody's got any specific questions around behavioural design, around data and anything that's in this kind of field that is of interest and that you'd either want to explore more, or if you're using it and you want to kind of think about how you could use it differently or get a different result, now is an opportunity to ask an expert in this. So Babs, I'm going to let you, you should be able to share your slides.
Yep, I will start
so
sharing.
I'm going to let you bust a few myths and explain a little bit more about the mystery that is behavioural.
I'm also going to probably need a willing participant, which I will nominate Paul to be at some point in this.
Tracy Finlay is always a very willing volunteer. Look at that face. He's always one to pick on.
The camera will go off.
Oh, Tony. Tony, where are you, Tony? Tony's always a good one as well.
Oh, dear. Okay, so can we see this okay? Surely
can.
Fabulous. This is good. Okay, so that's me. We've done that. The other letters after the name. The other letters after the name is that I'm a graduate member of the British Psychological Society, which basically means that I keep a lot of my learnings up to date, and I'm always reading new things around what's coming out in psychology. And I'm also a member of the Global Association. I know. There's also another group out there, the Global Association of Applied Behavioural Scientists, which has just been formed, which I'm also a member of as well. It's a very growing area at the minute, so there's lots of different organisations that are being established.
You'll have the alphabet after your name by the end of it.
I know. So behavioural science. So this hopefully gives a little bit of an idea, like a quick snapshot. So some of the terms that people may or may not have yet heard, and I'm coming in at this, the fact that some people probably have heard of behavioural science. Obviously, some people might already be quite expert in it, but there's lots of different terminologies that have kind of been thrown around. Again, where it's been really growing, particularly in the last 10 years, you hear these phrases. So you have behavioural science, and that's kind of like a catch-all term. As I've said there, it's an overarching term, which basically is the application of knowledge about human behaviour, primarily from psychology, into real world settings. So it's really been heavily used within marketing, and also a lot of policy as well. You may have heard, and especially in the last year in the UK and the US, but here in the UK, there's a behavioural insights team that kind of sits alongside government, and they've been there since David Cameron first became Prime Minister in 2010, but they have been kind of more visible, I suppose, in the last year, helping to nudge us through the pandemic and trying to encourage behaviours that are going to help get us as a society through the COVID-19 pandemic. So nudging is another term, again, that has been very popular, and in particular was made quite popular, as I say, about 10 years ago, which is when a Nobel Prize was won by a couple of behavioural economists, which is the blend of economics and psychology. They won a Nobel Prize for nudge theory. So the whole concept of nudging, which is making it easy for people to do something that they want to do. And one of the ways you do that is with choice architecture. So that's just, again, that's kind of where behavioural design comes in. So that's where, when you're designing certain views or whatever it might be, using this knowledge of how we behave and what makes us pay attention to things, or whatever it might be, that helps to nudge people along a process. Behaviour change is also another thing, and I was explaining this to Paul a while back. So you've got behavioural science, which is a catch-all term. A lot of that is based with consumer psychology, behavioural economics, cognitive psychology, social psychology. So there's loads of these different schools of thought that have all kind of culminated together to be defined as behavioural science. Then you have behavioural design, which is primarily what I do, and that's because I'm a designer. I, have those visual design skills. I use a lot of that behavioural science knowledge to design things, so design visual things, and also to design communications as well, which is obviously what's really quite relevant to contact centres. So it's not always just artwork, because there's also communications as well. But then you also have behaviour design, which is also sometimes called behavioural design, which makes it very confusing. But that is the application of behavioural science again, like behavioural design is, but it's to design behaviour. And that is primarily seen quite a lot of the time in perhaps app development or some kind of behaviour change programs. For example, helping people to give up smoking or lose weight. So to do something that's really going to be beneficial to them as an individual. So there's lots of behaviour that's the term is in there an awful lot, and it can get confused sometimes. So really though, like I say, it's been like a culmination of the worlds of psychology and economics, which has been happening really since the mid 20th century. And the reason why is historically economic theory, of which I'm not an expert, I'm not an economist, but it has really dominated. It's dominated with strategies, people trying to predict the way people are gonna behave and the way things are gonna turn out. And it's always really been based on that assumption of kind of rational thought being there in decision making, i.e. we're present, when we're making a decision, we're kind of weighing up the costs and benefits and that kind of thing, and then we're coming to a decision at the end of it. But quite often it's been shown that people deviate from that norm, and they seem to be kind of biased to go in a certain direction, or irrational, so to speak. And this is a term like irrational behaviour and biases are a real kind of common theme that comes through behavioural science. And like the key thing that underpins behavioural science as we know it at the moment is the work of a guy called Daniel Kahneman, and also with his late researcher Amos Tversky. And he's been researching decision making, and in particular economic decision making. So that's really down to consumer choice and why we make these decisions when we're buying something or thinking about buying something once we have something. And they've done decades worth of work. And in 2002, Daniel Kahneman won the Nobel Prize in economics, because you can't win one in psychology. It's not a recognized area, but he won it in the field of economics for what they've penned as prospect theory. And the whole concept of prospect theory, and this is a real key example of how on paper you would expect somebody or people to behave in a certain way, but actually in the real world they seem to do something quite different. And that's this concept that losses loom far greater than gains. An example of this would be, I suppose, if you've gone to the horses, for example, like if you put a bet on for £20 and you've lost on that particular race, you feel like an emotional loss, like you'd be a bit frustrated, and you would experience that emotionally, and it'll be quite painful when you think, oh, okay. Then on the next race you put some more money on and you win, and you win back the £20, so you're completely back to where you were before. You'd feel happy. But prospect theory has shown that the emotional response is far stronger in that loss than the gain. So you come back to your set point, so you've not lost anything, everything's great again on paper, but actually you've experienced a far greater emotional experience when you've experienced the loss versus the gain. And actually what they found is almost like an elongated S-curve, that it takes almost double the amount of gain to match that same emotional response that you've experienced with the initial loss. And
I think that's a really interesting, and it's sorry to jump in, but I think a lot of people thinking along these lines around customer experience and customer service. And actually that says to me, when we're working in the contact center and we're experiencing all these kind of anti-crescendo moments for customers that are like these really poor experiences, we have to essentially work twice as hard to put them back into a winning position, if you like. So actually there's a lot more legwork that needs to be done with the contact center agents, or with the customer experience and the recovery of that loyalty, if we're putting them on the back foot a little bit.
Exactly right. And other things as well, like relating to loss aversion, which you may have heard of, and also risk aversion, which is a slightly different concept, but they are obviously very closely linked, because if you are very highly risk averse, then you're obviously likely to be very loss averse as well. But we all seem to have this same pattern of behaviour. Some people are definitely more loss averse than others. So some people really will feel that loss, that emotional response to loss, far more strongly than another person. But it does seem that it's a very enduring theory, to the point where it's won a Nobel Prize, and it is just the perfect example of how we deviate from what you would expect on paper. So I'm going to go on, and I'm just going to basically introduce you to the main kind of underpinning of all of this, and that is dual mind theory. So if you think about, if you're standing out in a field and you hear a buzz near your ear, you react to that buzz before you recognize what the buzz is. So, I mean, I certainly do, because I absolutely hate wasps, and I'm not afraid to admit that one. I run away. But this is this concept that we react first in a lot of circumstances before we recognize, because we have a really fast processing part of our brain, and I use that figuratively. It's just, with visual perception, there is one system called the dorsal stream, which basically is you recognize something's coming towards you, you duck out of the way before you then have that extra couple of seconds of processing time to recognize what it was that was coming towards you. So we can see in that kind of application, we can see that, okay, we do one thing and then we do another thing. We are fast and we are also slow. So this is an exercise which you can do in your heads. I mean, Paul, if you want to unmute and do it out loud for people, then feel free. But the first exercise to kind of demonstrate these two systems, this fast and slow, is thinking of a phone number you know really well. So, mobile number. If somebody said to you, what's your mobile number? What's your home phone number? Then you would reel it off really, really quickly.
4191 586 5761.
There you go.
Don't everybody be ringing my parents, whatever you do.
But now say it backwards.
Oh God. 1675 685 1910. That hurts.
Yeah, it's horrible, isn't it? And this is an example of, obviously we're really habituated into, like, once we know our phone number, then, or whatever it might be, then we can reel it off really quickly. And that is when our system one part of our mind is at work. So that's our really automatic processing, really quick way of communicating and understanding the world. Whereas when you then have to reverse it and say it backwards, it slows you down, and you are really aware of the fact that you are like cognitively working then. Your brain's really applying a lot of effort here. Another one for you, and I don't know if anybody has the brain training game on a Nintendo DS back when they first came out. I certainly did. But you have to say the colour that the word is written in on the screen. Over to you, Paul.
I was hoping you were going to volunteer, Tracy. Okay. Blue, orange, yellow, green, red, purple, black.
Lovely. And now do it again.
Orange, purple, red, blue.
You've got to say the colour they're written in.
Oh, Yeah, see? Green, black, yellow, red, blue, orange, purple.
It's horrible, isn't it? I mean, and the thing here as well. So again, this is this is an example of the fact that we have a lot of automatic processes going on all the time. We can't help but read a word, for example, when we're presented with something. We will read the word. We won't just kind of see it for what it is. We'll always start reading that, and that's exactly what was happening there. You really had to really apply effort to turn off that automatic process of reading the word, and actually then you would have tried to focus down into one area to look at the color of the word. This, I will quickly play this. This is a little game that we can all just look at, and this is, keep your eye on where the chocolate ends up.
And if you're my age, you've now got the Benny Hill theme tune running through your head.
I think I've still got it.
Good. It does stop eventually, I promise. So where did it end up?
I'm saying bottom left.
Correct. It did end up in the bottom left.
Was I right?
You were right, and that was quite a lot. So to keep your eyes on. But did you see the duck?
I didn't actually know.
Okay, and there were two other things that happened in it as well that changed from start to finish.
You know, it's like that Darren Brown sketch where he's did you see the gorilla come on and take the
This is
banana?
exactly what it is. This is exactly the same thing, and this is inattentional blindness. I'm going to quickly replay it again. I will mute it so we don't have music, but just keep your eye on it and see if you can see there are two things that changed, and there was a duck.
Oh, I see the duck.
There's the duck.
There's the green cups.
So the blue cups are being switched out to be green cups, and there's also a fifth hand that keeps coming in from time to time. So this is an example of we rely on our previous knowledge, what was known as schema theory, to kind of predict what's going to happen. So you've got a task in hand, and that task really matters to you at that moment in time. You, although it doesn't matter if you get it right or wrong, you always want to perform well. So your attentional spotlight is really focused on where that sweet is under that particular cup. And this just shows how once you're that heavily focused on things, we can easily miss things that are there in plain sight. This is actually also how a lot of looked but failed to see car accidents can happen, because of this inattentional blindness, but also because we have like we're not expecting to see a duck, so we're not looking for a duck. And it shows how once we're really focused on something, we are really focused on it. We don't think we're missing stuff in plain sight, but we are.
And you know what, I think if we think about this in the context of how it impacts in a contact center, I think the key bit for me, and the bit that resonates there for me, is that if you're an agent, if you're a team leader, you're busy doing your thing. You're busy in the moment, and what typically tends to happen is we forget that we've got a customer on the other side of the fence that has emotions, that has feelings, and we react to our process. This is what we do. This is how we do it. So I think when we're thinking about behavioral design in training or in kind of processes, I think it's getting our agents to think more with that dual aspect, if you like, to anticipate what's coming up. But I think it's a really interesting concept.
It is, and so the thing that I really want to get across here, like this is basically, these are the two systems, and these aren't necessarily like actual structures in the mind. It's not like one hemisphere is system one and the other is system two. But there are obviously like certain areas that are definitely more active when people are really heavily concentrating, i.e. that's when system one is most active. But I think this is a nice way to just kind of get across the fact that supposedly around, I mean, there's a common figure that's bounded around that's up to 90%, 95% of our decisions are made kind of under the level of conscious awareness, i.e. by system 1, because it's really quick and efficient, and we follow the path of least resistance in our minds, right? And there's this theory called cognitive miser theory, which I think is a horrible sounding theory. However, it's actually a really good evolved thing that we have. It means that we can use these quick rules of thumb. When we know we've got to pay attention to one thing, we're not looking out for a random duck that's going to come in the visual field somewhere, because 9 times out of 10 we're not going to need to see that. So actually it means that we can be really, really efficient, and we can work really efficiently. But system 2 is something that is really effortful and sometimes feels quite painful, i.e. when you need to like reverse your phone number and suddenly we call that back out. But we do need to have that conscious thought and that rational thought a lot of the time. But our patterns of behaviour are so influenced by system 1 that we need to make sure that we're designing solutions and we're communicating with people, be it staff, our colleagues, be it customers, in a way that is actually going to resonate with system 1, rather than this really kind of effortful thinking that we tend to kind of fall into with system 2. So that, hang on. Oh, one last bit of maths, and then I'll finish. But a quick bit of maths for you. You can do it in your head. A bat and a ball together cost £1.10. The bat is £1 more than the ball. How much does the ball cost? 10p?
I would have said 10p, but I don't get feel I'm wrong.
I know, you know there's a trick coming up. It's actually 5p. It's 5p. The bat is £1 more than the ball. So if the ball was 10p, then the bat would be £1.10, which would then make the collective price £1.20. Therefore, to make the collective price £1.10, the ball is 5p, because it's £1. Well, the ball is £1 less than the bat. But this is again an example of where you see a sum, you know it's not particularly difficult on face value. So system 1's just kicked in, and system 1, your automatic process has gone, okay, yeah, £1, 10p. That's, you know, 10p is the end answer. And this is, don't worry, because this has been run in like Harvard and other Ivy League mathematics courses, and they've all done exactly the same thing. I think over half of them have fallen straight for the 10p or 10 cents answer. But it shows that even if you're an absolute expert, we are all humans. The task with this one, I always have to stop and think about it. The one with the coloured words, I'm always slower on the condition where it's like where the colours don't match what the word says. And this is the power of like human behaviour. We can all know about it, but actually we all still follow these same patterns. So therefore, this is why it's so important to understand these little quirks of it as we're navigating through.
So I think there's some really interesting theory there, Babs, and I think for me it's probably understanding where are we seeing that behavioural science be applied into industry, be it contact centres or not, that is having a positive impact on sales growth, retention, customer experience. What are some of the trends that you're seeing? So
some of the trends that I think are actually really quite interesting. I'm getting rid of this now because that's a horrible looking graph or graphic. So sometimes the solutions feel quite jarring, and they seem to kind of go against like human nature, so to speak. Well, not human nature, but what we've had in place so far. And for example, like one of the really nice outcomes that have been seen in contact centres is actually slowing people down at the beginning of the call, because you don't want them to experience this cognitive overload. So if people are feeling, if they're suddenly very aware that they're having to process a lot of information, and that is when system 2 is like really kicking in, and that's really effortful, it can be quite stressful, and that can then impact on how quickly they are able to process that in their minds. So actually just letting people know that they can slow down as they're perhaps going through any security checks or whatever it might be at the beginning of the call can actually reduce the overall AHT of that call, even though you are telling people to slow down, which obviously just goes against what your as somebody working there, or a manager would be saying, well, no, it needs to be, you know, we need to speed people up, so therefore people need to be faster. That makes sense on paper, but actually slowing them down can make it faster overall, by reducing that kind of cognitive friction and that overload at the beginning, where haven't got to be as consciously aware of making a mistake or whatever it might be at the beginning. And other ways as well that, I mean, Paul, that we've been applying it is actually making the systems that people are using a lot easier to use, and to encourage people to kind of work in ways that, again, appeals more to that system one way of thinking, by, again, not overloading them cognitively. So cognitive ease is like a really, really key concept throughout all of this. Paul, I'm not sure if you've got...
I think there's some interesting stuff coming through on the chat. So I want to kind of ask Jo if she wouldn't mind taking herself off mute and just giving her thoughts on that, because I think the point that you're making there around cognitive overload very much links to the point that Jo's making. So, and then we'll come to Susie about autopilot. So Jo, over to you.
Thank you. I suppose there's a lot to think about as to how much we pass to handle to the agents or the team leaders, and how this then will affect their behaviors. So it's okay to, if it's, let's say, supportive of that first statement, what the activities that they do, but if it goes then against their that autopilot behavior onto something different, is that then inconvenience them? Would their reaction be triggered by what negative reaction customer might have? That, for example, the positive conversation becomes a negative conversation, then i.e. ends up as a complaint or a negative feedback. Do we take enough accountability of what we get agents to face, to then what the outcome will be from the back?
I think that's a really good point. It's almost like that betting analogy reversed, isn't it? So what would be your thoughts on that there, Babs?
Well, one of the key things as well, and this again, like mirroring, and also there's a concept of transference as well, which kind of, that is more in like the psychotherapy side of things, but it is definitely something that happens. We mirror behavior, and that's actually a really good thing to do. And especially from a customer service perspective, we can, if we, you know, for example, if it's a not so positive call for whatever reason, if it's something that's bad that's happened in someone's life, or you know, or they're cancelling something, then obviously there's going to, you know, potentially be quite a negative sentiment on that call. And sometimes the best way of getting people back round is by using the concept of mirroring that, to create empathy. So you can actively kind of, agents could be trained to actively engage that concept by, you know, just having some empathy there with the people that are there. But likewise, it can happen automatically as well. So if they are constantly on, you know, on that type of call, then yes, that can then lower that down. It's something, I mean, overloading us with things in general is never a good idea. That doesn't really take an expert to say that. But we also see this quite a lot with in lots of other sectors. For example, decision fatigue is quite a big thing, and it's seen with judges, with credit controllers, people who make decisions on how much credit someone's going to get on a credit card or something like that. And actually, by not having regular breaks, we can really impact the outcome for a customer. People have been shown to be more more negative in their decisions when they're kind of getting close to a break time, and afterwards they're more lenient, and that's been seen in lots of different settings, especially with judges even. So I think it really does highlight the importance that actually we do get cognitively overloaded, so therefore we do need to make sure that we are in some way working some kind of break there to ensure that people aren't taking too much of that on, because like you say, that could really have an impact on the overall assessment of, you know, of the company.
And thinking about kind of the economy of behavioral science and how we can kind of make sure that we're maximizing all the opportunities that we have from customers. I often think about the start point of the customer's journey starts with the online journey. You then decide, once you've done the online journey, if you can't interact with a chatbot or whichever, you then go into the telephony journey, and it starts with that piece around how good is the IVR, how bad is the hold music. So thinking about how we can apply behavioral science to the processes that we do, Babs, what would be some of your tips or suggestions as to how you can apply behavioral science right at the start point of that journey?
Well, I mean, there are many potential touch points where it can mean, like I say, we're humans, right? So anything that we interact with, it could be optimized with behavioral science. But taking, I mean, one, there's been, just even talking about music, like hold music, there are studies out there that have primed people using different types of music. And in supermarkets, for example, a study was done where German band music was played in a wine aisle one day, and then the following day some French music was played in the wine aisle, and they found that there was an increase in sales in German wines on the day with the German music playing, and the following day there was an increase in French wines being sold. And equally, consumers weren't actually that aware of there even actually being any music playing at that moment, let alone knowing the origin of it and what type of music it was. So actually, just for that snippet when they're in hold before they get connected, then obviously there could be quite a bit of a priming going on there with regards to how they're going to then be when they connect into the call. But with regards to chatbots, that's quite interesting, and like, you know, digital touch points. So this kind of irrational side of our brain is these patterns of behavior that we all seem to have. Lots of things regarding the design of things with the shape of them and the colors of them can actually have quite an impact, and even down to the shape of a button, which seems like quite an arbitrary thing, but it can have quite a significant impact on how likely people are to engage with that particular element on a website or whatever it might be. For example, rounded shapes are always seen as being, when they're alongside something that's more angular, rounded shapes are kind of seen as being more friendly. Like, people actually don't have that much of a problem almost kind of putting a personality as such on a particular shape. And there's been nearly a century's worth of testing done on this to show that actually angular shapes are seen as less friendly, rounded shapes are seen as more friendly, and therefore that impacts how much people want to engage with that particular button, as it might be. And faces, there's a whole part of our cortex that's kind of like pre-wired to recognize faces in things. So like, even like with babies, if they're presented with like a block and 2 light bulbs side by side, and then a third one in the center below that, which could easily be like 2 eyes and a mouth. And even from measuring how long babies will stare at that versus light bulbs in a line or in a different arrangement, babies will stare at those light bulbs far longer than they will the more randomly arranged ones. It's like we see faces in things, we see faces in slices of toast and
Turing shroud,
back of doors. Yeah.
Brilliant.
But we do, and that's this whole thing, because that's an evolutionary thing. We've evolved to quickly recognize faces and things, because obviously back in the olden caveman days, we needed to recognize a friend or a foe really quickly. So when you're designing like an online experience, having, I mean, even something simple as, sometimes if it's a chatbot, one, not almost making it not too human, which I know sounds a bit counterproductive. It needs to be efficient more than it needs to be trying to emulate a complete human, because the way that AI and this, you know, obviously I'm not an engineer in this at all, so Paul, feel free to tell me that I'm saying that I've got it completely wrong. But you know, the way that these are programmed, again, they are typically programmed kind of assuming that we're going to follow like an A plus B equals C, very rational path through. And they're not really that good at the moment, it seems, to really pick up those nuances of human behavior, those irrational parts, which is where our automatic system one's really dominating. So for it to be efficient enough to deal with the smaller things, and have an avatar there, making sure that the avatar has a face, because we will see that face, like our attention will go to that face, because we are hardwired to see faces. But it doesn't necessarily have to be like a fake human, you know, it doesn't have to be like a photo and have like a whole persona, because we actually don't struggle too much anthropomorphizing, like putting some kind of like human characteristics on inanimate objects anyway. We do it with brands and companies. We can easily, studies again for decades have shown that we have no problem with kind of thinking of those, and we do think of brands almost as human beings, and we stereotype them in the same way, and like we think of them in the same way that we would do with other social groups of people. So would definitely say, I know there's been like a big movement with trying to make a chatbot like the most human experience you possibly can. But I think until the technology absolutely nails the complexity of system one being dominant all the time, then don't try to pretend it's human, but instead
call
use
a spade. That's what it is.
Yeah.
And actually, people get so much wound up with those types of things. It's untrue. And I see Tracy nodding furiously there. I think we've had lots of rants about that. Paul, I just want to kind of come to you, because I know you guys in Team, you do a lot of work with contact centers anyway, in trying to bring some of this to life. So I think, what are the biggest things that you're seeing in contact centers as how this has been applied, and how can people on today's call potentially look to make changes in their process to help improve the implementation of our behavioural science in the contact center?
Yeah, thanks. I think there's probably 1,000,001 different ways that we could help influence processes in the contact center using data science combined with behavioral design, combined with behavioral science. And even we're only just getting started down that path ourselves. I think some great points there about chatbots. You know, I think call a spade, and like people know what they want. Sometimes they want a chatbot, and when they want a chatbot, that's fine, it's great, it's there. There's so much use of the word AI thrown about left, right, and centre, and we're big advocates of, you know, exactly that, calling a spade, and most chatbots just aren't AI. They're not even close to being that. AI is coming along in leaps and bounds, and every year there's new sort of iterations of what it's capable of doing. It's getting ever closer, we're still a long way away from that. So yeah, that's a starting point for a lot of the technology in the contact centers, is just make sure that you're aware of what its limitations are and what it's there for, and not what it should be sort of almost manipulated to be. I mean, would it be good to sort of have a look at how BABS has impacted on our designs to show, like, in a real way, like what sort of impacts the behavioural science has had? Is that something that you'd kind of think
that might be useful if you've got something that you could share that could put it into context?
Yeah, give me 2 seconds.
I think for me, there's just so many different ways that you can apply it, isn't there? I mean, I love that idea of nudge theory around giving people the impetus to do something different. And I think if you can nudge people along that journey, even with the change messages and change management, if you can nudge people along on a slow pace, they're more likely to be receptive to the changes as they come along, aren't they?
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
Yeah, so I mean, this is an example of one of the screens that BABS has worked very, very hard with us on to try and make it as engaging as possible for the agents themselves, for the coaches, who are the most important people in the business. You know, and it's about understanding all the different elements of what's going on in somebody's mind when they're looking at this. You know, what sort of frame of mind are they in? They're going to get coached. That's generally a negative experience. How do you contradict that? How do you counteract that? I mean, Babs, you're probably best placed to sort of explain the ins and outs of the behavioural design on there. But I mean, even just from my starting point, you know, when we talk about the rounded edges, pretty much everything is rounded, where it implies an interaction or it needs the eyes drawn to it. Babs, you want to talk through the colours? And
yeah, certainly. And I think there's another view as well, which is, I think, a real, this one in particular. So like I say, the round, I mean, the button shape, it does seem like a really, really small thing, but it can have a really big impact. Like I say, because of people perceiving it's been slightly more friendly and therefore wanting to engage a bit more. So the person using this, the whole idea there is that, you know, they're going to go through and they're going to see what needs to be interacted with. The purpose of this is to get them to schedule coaching, as Paul said. But one of the key things that I've put into this is using reinforcement theory. So it's a part of behavioural psychology, positive reinforcement. So in order to encourage the behaviour you want to encourage, then to give a positive reinforcements, and quite like gamification that we see in apps and whatever it might be. If it happens at a point where the desired behaviour, i.e. an agent doing particularly well, is recognised in a very timely manner, it can be more impactful than, I don't know, a week or two down the line when it's recognised at that point. So the whole idea of this give kudos function in the system is that as the coach is in there booking coaching with people that need to be coached, they also then are prompted to recognise the people that don't need coaching, that are doing really well, because that keeps them on that trajectory, ideally through positive reinforcement. They're going to continue doing what they've been doing. And it also then frames it for the coach in a slightly more positive frame as mind, because historically this type of software has always been looking at, you know, okay, so-and-so needs coaching because they're underperforming on a certain KPI. Whereas this is just a way of just using these little things to frame it in a more positive way, and to use this approach of positive reinforcement through behavioural psychology at a point that's consistent and timely, and also the agent is unlikely to be expecting it as well, because it's going to be coming, you know, at a point when they've just performed, rather than you know, like I say, in a review meeting and 1 week, 2 weeks, or whenever further down the line, because they're not getting coached.
I'm going to have to stop you there because we've reached the top of the hour. So Paul, if you wouldn't mind stopping sharing. I mean, I could talk for hours about this stuff, and I think there's loads of stuff. I mean, we could probably spend another session just focusing specifically on positive reinforcement within the team leadership role and how that can kind of be helped. And I think there's a session that's coming up in November with Mark Walton where we're talking about how do you increase engagement and productivity in agents in a remote sense. So I might have to invite you back for that one. But I think that's been a really useful, mind-bending session for me. And I think it's the idea of a button, a colour, and all that kind of stuff that then pulls it together to help kind of inform people's thinking. We didn't even get to the ethics of the behavioural side of things, which could have been a whole new webinar. But I think for me that was useful insight into how we can start to think and frame the conversation, the process. Cognitive overload was a massive one that came out for me in terms of how do you move away from thinking about the multiple processes and the multiple things that you're asking your agents to do when they're experiencing contact with the customer, as well as the communication itself, which was really interesting. We do have more events coming up. So we've got another one happening on the 30th of September, I think it is, 12 till 1 this one. So don't be moved or betwixt by the change in time. But we've got Gustav Imhoff coming to join us next month, and we're going to be talking about how you can not bankrupt your contact center with CX. So going to be focused on how you can do it perhaps on a budget, or maybe think about CX in a more cost efficient way. And then we've also got complaint strategies in first call resolution in October. And then we've got Mark Walton rounding off the year because we're taking a break in December. So if you have enjoyed today and you want to attend others, please do visit the website and register. And I look forward to seeing everybody again in September. So thank you very much, everybody. Take care. I'll let you all go.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.